That introduction. It's been a pleasure for me to be here with NALEO, to meet so many people. You know, I had an experience today. Alex mentioned I used to work for NPR. When I worked in radio, people would come up to me and say, Juan, it's nice to be able to finally put a face with the voice. I would say, I didn't know what you look like either. It's a surprise to me. But then today, I had this incredible experience where a woman came up to me and she said, wow, it's great. Finally, I'm able to put a body with the face. I never had that said before. I could only think, I hope she liked the body, you know what I mean? So anyway, first, before I introduce our esteemed guests, let me just say thank you so much to Wells Fargo for their sponsorship of this annual meeting as well as this session. I also want to thank all of you following the live stream of our session at www.naleo.org. And I have one more thank you. Thank you to everyone who is using the conference hashtag NALEOConf, NALEOCONF. It is trending, and so thank you. People are using it. Now, the main event of this 31st annual conference, our plenary, 50 years after the Civil Rights Act. With us, Dolores Huerta, former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, and NAACP San Diego President Lei-Chala Wilson. Please welcome all of them. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to have a brief conversation with each of them for 1 or 2 minutes, and then we're going to have the conversation among the entire group, and hopefully we will reflect all of your interest and questions. Now, so much has been said about Ms. Huerta. It's hard to have to introduce her, but let me try and simply say she created the Agricultural Workers Association in 1960. She co-founded the United Farm Workers Union, and now she works through her own foundation. Let me tell you, she is an icon, not only in the Latino community, but in America. She is American history. So my first question goes to Dolores Huerta. 50 years later, what's the most significant outcome of the civil rights movement?
Well, I think if we see today, we have a lot of Latinos and African Americans organizations. We have engineers, we have attorneys, much more so than when I went to college, when there were maybe 6 of us on the campus, on the whole campus. And of course, with women also, we have large numbers of women that are now doctors, attorneys, engineers, et cetera. So we know that we've come a long way. We have, of course, more representation, African American and Latino representation in our legislatures. But at the same time, we know that we still have a long way to go. Even though the civil rights movement was about getting the right to vote, in today's world, we see that voter suppression. And one of the areas that we don't talk about a lot about voter suppression is the whole area of redistricting. We have still, even in the state of California, we have many, many of our cities here where you have to have general elections in general districts, and not by districts where people can elect someone that looks like them. And right now there's a bill in the California State Legislature by Roger Hernandez to try to say it's got to be a law in the state of California that elections have got to be by districts, so that people of color then can get somebody that looks like them, to be able to sit on those councils or school boards, supervisorial districts, et cetera. So while we've gained a lot, we know that through voter suppression and some of these other tactics. Another one is not allowing felons to vote. I'm actually on the National Voting Rights Commission, and we had hearings throughout the United States. And in the state of Washington, for instance, if you've been in prison, they make you pay restitution. You cannot vote until you pay all of the money that you owe. So that means people, about 300,000 people, we heard that testimony in Kings County alone in Washington State cannot vote because of that. So we have all of these other little ways that they are trying to keep people from voting.
Now, when you look back to this period, and I don't mean to give away your age.
Oh, I don't mind. I'm 84.
I know, I'm teasing you. I tell you, when I'm 84, I hope to look as good as you, sweetheart, you know? So, it is such a pleasure to be with you every time, but I just wanted to say, when you look back 50 years to your life, 1960s, and that moment, the passage of a Civil Rights Act, a Voting Rights Act, did you have any idea that it would have real impact on America, that it was going to really change, that one day you would have Latinos as the second largest minority in the country?
Well, I know that from my own experience in being involved in getting people to vote or whatever, that it was going to be able to make a difference in who we elected to represent us. And of course, if we don't like the laws, then we have to elect people to office that will change the laws. And so I did foresee that kind of an impact, because I was involved like 10 years before the Civil Rights Act was actually signed. But at the same time, I remember the kind of harassment that I, as a young Latina, suffered at the hands of police and teachers, sometimes, et cetera. And I see my great-grandchildren, suffering those same types of discrimination, so to speak. And so I think on the political level, yes, we have made a lot of headway, but still on the personal level, I think we still, and we know that racism is still alive and well in our United States of America. Even though we do have an African-American president, and people use that as an excuse, no, it's there. And we can see that in play in all of the politics that is happening right now, including the refusal of the Republican Congress to take up the Immigration Reform Act.
Thank you so much. Now let me introduce our second guest, former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, the 80th Attorney General of the United States from 2005 to 2007. He was the former General Counsel to Texas Governor Bush, former Texas Secretary of State, a member of the Texas Supreme Court, and now a law professor at Belmont University in Tennessee. He's also, in keeping with what we're going to be doing here at the convention in the next few days, he's also, you should know, an Air Force veteran. Please join me in welcoming Attorney General Gonzales. Judge, 50 years ago, the government in this country enforced laws of segregation. Today, in your mind, what is the government's role, specifically the Department of Justice's role, in protecting civil rights?
Well, first of all, let me just say that my story is the American story. Your story is the American story. And that story has been written on the backs of individuals like this woman sitting to my right. It's also been written based upon the laws like the Civil Rights Act, and I think the Department of Justice has a very important role in enforcing laws like the Civil Rights Act. But let's be clear, from my perspective as a former Attorney General, laws cannot change the hearts of men and women. And I don't know, whether or not education, communication will someday eradicate the fear that motivates the prejudice that exists in this country. Maybe so. I hope so. I think we can all work toward that. But until that day comes, we do need laws like the Civil Rights Act. And I'm very proud of the work of the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, acknowledged and want to give credit to Secretary Perez for his work there. But we've got some serious challenges, even within the Department of Justice, to be quite honest with you. Just last year, there was a very tough report issued by the Inspector General, very critical of the Civil Rights Division under both President Obama and under President Bush. Too much partisanship, too much division within the Civil Rights Division, which is charged with keeping a level playing field here in America. And if they can't even do that within their division, how can they hope to be effective nationwide? So it's something that I think we need to keep our eyes on. But clearly, I think the Civil Rights Act is one of the most important pieces of legislation passed by Congress. It exists today because we need it still today.
Now, when you look at all of the arguments that are going on in the states, Ms. Huerta referred to this about voter disenfranchisement and efforts to limit voter turnout, does it concern you as a matter of law, or do you think that's just politics?
When I was Secretary of State, I traveled the state trying to get more Texans to vote. We have a serious problem in this country simply getting people to vote, and that's particularly true in the Hispanic community. We're not going to enjoy any power or influence unless we come out and vote on Election Day. And I, for one, support two goals. One is that we encourage many eligible voters to vote, and two, we protect the sanctity of the vote. I think they are not mutually exclusive. I think we can have both, quite frankly. I don't have a problem, and I am on record supporting voter ID laws so long as the laws passed by the states are not passed with the intention of discriminating against minorities and the elderly and the poor, and that the states provide a mechanism so that people that are poor, that they don't have the money, that they do have access to some kind of ID that does allow them to vote. Even Secretary Perez talked about the fact of expanding the right to vote for eligible voters. How do we know whether or not they're eligible? That's the key. They have to be eligible voters.
Okay, and our third guest this afternoon is Lei-Chala Wilson. She is the president of the San Diego branch of the NAACP. She's serving there for her 6th year. Ms. Wilson was a San Diego public defender for more than 24 years. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Wilson.
Thank you.
Lei-Chala, when you think about the commemoration, 50 years, what extent do you think the United States has changed with regard to race relations? To what extent do you think the country has stayed the same?
Well, I would have to mirror what Ms. Huerta said. We have made some progress. When you look at jobs, when you look at employment, segregation, things have gotten a little better, but I still think a lot of things have remained the same. So when you look on the outside, it looks like we've made a lot of progress. And I hesitate to always use that word, we have much work to do. We've been talking about doing a lot of work for the last 300 or 400 years. And my people are tired of always have to do work. I mean, no matter what we've done in this country, my people and other people of color, we're always struggling. And so I'm not sure why we are always struggling. And the best way I can explain it is I try to tell people that being black in America is like watching a bad movie. It's the same movie playing over and over again. The only difference is the characters or the scenery. But it seems like, I guess it swings back and forth, but we keep struggling, and I wish that would change. And of course, we are going to have to keep trying to get better. But in a way, sometimes I wonder if we're in 2014 or we're in 1940. Because it just seems like it's the same old battles. When my people reached this country, it was always education. They denied that. Voting, we had Jim Crow, and now it looks like Jim Crow's son grew up, and now we got James Crow, and we're still having problems with the vote, which is very important to me, and there's no reason to have the voter ID. And even though I agree with our former Attorney General, that long as the laws do not discriminate against minorities, poor people, but that's the only reason to have those laws is because whether it's their intent, you still have the discriminatory impact. And that's what's important. And so I just want my people to be able to get education. I want my people to be able to vote. And once that happens, then I know we've moved forward.
You know, Ms. Wilson, the 50 years ago, Secretary Perez mentioned next year, 50 years after the Voting Rights Act. You would think 50 years later, we wouldn't be in this place. But you're saying we keep coming back to this point. That's not to suggest that we haven't made progress, but it does suggest that, again, that there's some stubborn issues about race in American society. And it looks, when we think about it in the 50-year context, that the argument has changed with demographics, because you now have so many more Latinos in America, you have more blacks, more Asians, so that you have about a third of the population as people of color. How has that impacted the change in the last 50 years?
I don't know if it's impacted change, because the problem is the more people of color you have, those who are in power, they are in fear. And that's the reason that I think we're having these problems is demographics are going to change and there's fear. And as a result of that, that's why you have these type of laws. And the only reason why you want to keep out To keep people not educated and not able to vote is you want to keep them out of power. But eventually, the numbers are going to change, and it's going to be a whole different ballgame. I'm not sure if I'll see that within my lifetime, but then again, I didn't expect to see a black president. So there's still hope there.
All right. Well, now I just want to encourage all of my panelists to join in the conversation, to interrupt each other, argue with each other. Already we have seen some difference of perspective with regard to what is going on with voter ID laws. And as we know in this session, for all of you as elected officials, there's a tremendous emphasis on increasing voter turnout this year, 2014, in the midterm elections. People are looking for that kind of increase. In fact, today, NALEO has announced that they project that there is going to be an increase. From 2010, the last time we had midterms, it was 6.9% of a Latino vote. This year, 2014, the expectation is 7.8% of a Latino vote in the midterm elections. So when I look at that, Mr. Attorney General, I say there's more vote coming. But what if those people are unable to vote?
Well, let me be clear about this point in response. I want all of our people to come out and vote on Election Day. Now, if Republicans are worried that that's going to happen, then they need to change their message. If they feel like they cannot get the Hispanic vote, then Republicans need to re-message. But I want all eligible Hispanics to come out and vote on Election Day.
So, this is a bipartisan organization. The question would be, is it the case to you as a Republican that you think, well, maybe Ms. Wilson is right, there are people who fear sharing power?
There's no question about that. And I think that's some of the resistance, perhaps a lot of the resistance within our party with respect to immigration reform. People are fearful of the way our country is changing. They're even more fearful of the fact that it's changing without any kind of thought or regulation or guidance from our leaders. And I think that's been the source of some of the problem we have with respect to not making progress on immigration reform. I think fear, yes, and it's understandable, quite frankly. There needs to be better communication, better understanding amongst our groups in order to make progress in this area.
Ms. Wilson?
Well, what I'm curious about is yesterday in Congress, they had a vote on the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted last year, a part of it, by our U.S. Supreme Court, which is also, I guess, conservative gutted it. But why is it that when they took the vote, not one Republican voted to allow the hearing to go forward or for there to be a vote on it? And it was all the Republicans. And that Voting Rights Act, when it was first passed, it was bipartisan. It's been there for almost 50 years, and now all of a sudden, the game has changed. And you would think that a country that goes around all over the world trying to spread democracy cannot even get it right here at home.
Well, but it sounds like you think you know the answer.
Well, the answer is to let the people vote.
No, I meant, I think you know the answer with regard to why not one Republican would vote to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act.
Yes.
And what's the answer?
Well, the reason they're doing it is because it's the people of color, minorities that vote for Democrats. They want to suppress those votes. That's the only reason.
Attorney General Gonzales, how would you respond?
Well, I can't speak. It's not my place to speak for Republicans in the Congress or in the Senate. And I don't know what legislation you're talking about. I think you're talking about revising the provision of the Voting Rights Act, which would have been Section 4, which was struck down by the Supreme Court in the Shelby case. And it could be as simple as this is a very complicated formula, which is a predicate for the Department of Justice being able to impose a preclearance requirement. And maybe the Republicans were simply unhappy with that formula. I don't know. They don't consult with me anymore. But I don't know the reasons for that. But that's what we're talking about here, is that the Supreme Court struck down a formula that was based on racial demographics in 1965. And the court said, you can't do that. You've got to update it. And so now this is an attempt by Congress to update Section 4, which would allow then the Department of Justice to impose these pre-clearance requirements.
Ms. Huerta, when you hear about things like efforts to limit the number of days that people can vote, limit the hours that precincts are open, does it strike you as punitive, or do you think, well, no, if it's for everybody, that's fair? What do you think?
I think it is fair, and it is voter suppression, and we need to change that, and it would be great if we had the same laws for the whole country instead of every state having their own different kind of laws. And one thing that the Republicans really need to understand, look at this figure. Every single month in our United States of America, 73,000 Latinos reach the age of 18. Like, I'm going to repeat that. Every month in the United States of America, 73,000 Latinos reach the voting age of 18 years old. And that is something that they need to look at. Another thing, I just want to throw this out when we talk about the power of the Latino vote. In the governor of Virginia's campaign, Terry McCullough, he won with 53,000 votes. 63,000 Latinos voted. He won with the Latino vote. And because his opponent was very anti-immigrant. Harry Reid, when he was running for the Senate in Nevada, he endorsed immigration reform. He reached out to the Latino community, and the Latino community pushed him over the top in the state of Nevada. So they need to take note. And the more that they do voter suppression, the more that they attack the immigrant community, because when they attack the immigrant community, they're attacking me. My great-grandfather was in the Civil War in the Union Army, okay? You know, I was born on this side of the border when they put that border, okay? and you know, but my children and my grandchildren, they get the attacks because they happen to be brown. And they've got to understand that they are, every time that they come out and they attack our community gets very angry. And this whole thing about immigration reform, I mean, all they have to do is set it for a vote. Boehner and McCarthy say we're going to have a vote on immigration reform. You know, 75% of the country supports it. 60% of Republicans support it. Okay, give us a vote. That's all we're asking. They've got to do their job. And the more that they continue to attack our community, the more people are going to become Democrats. And they've got to change the message. The other thing, as you were saying, but the other thing is that all the pollsters show the Latino community, they love Obamacare. They love Obamacare because millions of them are uninsured. They also love big government. They think that the problems that we have in our society, that we need government to cure them. So the Republicans are on the wrong side of the messaging right now. And eventually it's going to catch up. It's going to catch up to them. And I don't care how much voter suppression they do, eventually people are going to be able to vote, no matter what.
Well, you know, Reese, you just said, it's up to Boehner and McCarthy. And that's on the Republican side in the House of Representatives. Now, if we were together a few weeks ago, you would have said Boehner and Cantor. But you know what happened to Mr. Cantor? He was defeated in Virginia, and one of the issues that his opponent used against him was that he supposedly was for amnesty.
Okay, but if we look at that election, they only had an 8% turnout to begin with, okay? But let's look at Lindsey Graham's election, okay? Lindsey Graham won his election, and he is for immigration reform, and he defeated all of his Tea Party opponents, okay? So they're using that now, but that was not just a real issue, okay?
You don't think it was a real issue?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that the press is playing that up. But one other thing I want to say, too, if we want to get immigration reform, we've got to call on our corporate buddies, okay, to help us. And I'm going to use this kind of a comparison. In Arizona, when the legislature passed a law that they were going to let public places discriminate against our friends, the gay community, all the corporations jumped in right away and said to the governor, don't sign that bill, right? They jumped in there immediately. You know, we love our gay, our LGBTQ community. I'm on the board of Equality California. But, hey, we're a lot more people. You know what I mean? The Latinos, we're a lot more people. Where are our corporate buddies at now? Okay, we need them. We need them to go to talk to their friends in the Republican Congress and say, you need to vote for immigration reform right now. We're not going to give up. We're not going to give up.
Attorney General Gonzales, I saw you nodding a moment ago when we were talking about what happened to Eric Cantor in Virginia.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that immigration was that big an issue in that race. Let me just say about immigration reform. My perspective is that Congress, I agree, that Congress needs to vote on this. And they need to do it soon. This is, as other speakers have talked about, this is a law enforcement, national security, economic issue. This is about us. This is about America, who we are as a country, and this is something that we need to do. And I've heard Republicans say, well, wait a minute, we don't want to go down this road because this president, he's only going to enforce the laws that he wants to. My perspective is Congress has a job to do. If the president's not doing his job, that doesn't excuse Congress from doing their job. They ought to be doing their job. They ought to pass a bill, and both branches ought to be working together. So to me, it's intolerable. And I know how hard this is. President Bush tried, and we couldn't get it done with a Republican Congress. But that's why we elect these people to go there, isn't it? To tackle the most difficult issues we have as a country. And, they should be accountable. They should be accountable.
But what your position is so interesting to me because obviously there are Republicans, people inside the party, who just are resisting this, especially the talk radio crowd, who say you're rewarding people who have done illegal things. So you're in a position here of an intra-party, a civil war within the Republican Party over this issue. How do you see it playing out?
I think in the end, my side will win.
Okay.
Or it's the end of the party.
The end of the party.
Yeah, that's the way I see it.
Really?
Yeah, I think this is something that's got to be solved. And the truth of the matter is, Hispanics are a growing political force, and if they feel like the Republican Party doesn't have anything for them, they're going to vote Democrats, and the Republicans aren't going to win the White House. They're not going to, they're going to lose control of the House, won't win control of the Senate, and so I think this is an important issue. I really do. And I don't know what Republicans are waiting for. We've really moved way off of civil rights. I don't know what Republicans are waiting for. It's as if they're hoping something's going to change that's going to allow them to get what they want with respect to immigration reform. This is such a hard issue that both sides have to give. No one's going to get everything that they want, and so there has to be compromise. I don't know what they're waiting for.
But I was struck, you say the end of the party, because in 2016, unless you have some Latino vote for Republicans, it's very difficult to see on the map how Republicans could win the presidency.
I think it's going to certainly be a challenge.
A challenge. Ms. Wilson?
That's not my area, so.
We've got you here in the hot seat, so we're turning up the heat.
Okay.
Ms. Wilson, what do you think about this idea that, unless the party deals with voter disenfranchisement issues, immigration reform, the Republicans have a troubled future?
I agree. That's going to happen. And if I may say, it wouldn't be a bad thing to me.
You're a Democrat.
Oops.
To bring it back to point about increasing voter turnout in 2014, can people like these elected officials here this afternoon, Dolores, use these issues to spur Hispanic voter turnout?
Well, I think we have a lot of work to do. Number one, we know education is a big issue right now. We have these huge, my organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation. By the way, we're on the web, doloreshuerta.org. And that we're fighting this issue right now because of the huge suspensions of African Americans, which are like 500% above the norm, Latinos 300% above the norm. This is one of the issues that we're fighting right now. And the other thing that's scary, they don't teach civics in school anymore. So, young people don't even know why they should be voting in the first place. And so if we wonder, why aren't people voting? Because they don't even understand the importance of voting. And we've got to really get out there. And in the Latino community, we kind of have to be invited to vote, right? If somebody doesn't invite you, you're not going to vote. So I would say to the public officials that are here, we have a lot of power in this room. I was talking about how many Latinos and other young people are going to be turning 18. I think we should have voter registration in every single high school, okay? Every single high school, they should register, and that should be just constant. And we need to, give kids credits to go out there and knock on doors to get out the vote. That was my experience, my first experience in, you might say in leadership, is going out there and knocking on doors. That's when I came to a home of a farm worker family and saw the poverty that they were living in. And that's when I quit being a school teacher to become an organizer. So I think that going door to door and giving kids school credit to go out there, and it doesn't have to be on a partisan basis, right? They can go into any neighborhood, but knock on doors to remind people that they have to vote. But we have to really make democracy work. And we cannot have a democracy when we have over 50% of the people not voting. And these local elections are important, these school board elections are important. We want our kids to know the contribution of people of color, of the Chinese. When we were Governor McCullough's election there, and he said, we're at the governor's mansion in Virginia. This is the oldest governor's mansion in the United States, and it was built by Thomas Jefferson. And I said, it was built by his slaves, right? It was built by his slaves. And this is the history that our kids have to know, the contributions of the Chinese and the Mexicans to build the railroads, right? And who farms our land, and all of the contributions that people of color made to this country, because they don't know that, and why it's important for them to vote. But we can do it. We have the power right here in this room, all over the country, that we can instill some of these practices and procedures to make sure our people vote.
Can I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm a Republican, as you know. And I am proud to be a Republican for many reasons. And we've had some great Republican leaders for the Hispanic community. George W. Bush was extremely popular in the Hispanic community because he had the right message, the right tone. He was the right messenger, quite frankly. Not that Hispanics agree with all the policies, but I think that they believed that he believed in them and understood them. And that comes from, part of that comes from being a governor of a border state. I think it hurts the Hispanic community to have one party, or one so dominant party, the other party is really meaningless. Because I think you need to have two competing parties, quite frankly, that don't take the Hispanic community for granted, right? They ought to be competing for our vote. So I think that's very important.
Good point. But part of that, and I want to conclude on this message, on this question, is about turnout. Because we want to see more people participating in the democratic process. The essential element of that is the vote. But when you look at it, let's go back to the last presidential election, 2012, 66% African American turnout, 64% white American turnout. When you come to the Hispanic community, 48%. And we can do this with midterm elections as well. Why is it that you see in the mindset of the Latino community a lack of this enthusiasm for voting that you see in other communities?
Well, I think, and I've done this, I guess, for the last 60-some years, going door to door, getting people to vote. A lot of times, people don't know how to vote, and they're afraid that they're going to do the wrong thing. So they get this long ballot with all these names that they don't know and propositions, et cetera. And so we have to say to them, you know what, vote for what you know. They don't get the proper information about who to vote for. There's a lot of confusion, and they don't want to do the wrong thing, and so they just don't vote. So that's why it's important to our community and the people in this room that we actually have to go out there and educate people how to vote, because we know that if they vote one time, just one time that they vote, they will keep on continue to vote. And we can do this work, but it takes a lot of legwork. And you're not going to do it on television, right? You're not going to do it on TV, and you're not going to do it on radio. You've got to go into the neighborhoods. I mean, this is what my organization does. We actually go door to door. We have, in our community, we have actually been able to activate over 10,000 voters just in the area that we work at. And if we had more money, we could, get more community organizers and go out there into more communities. But people will vote once they understand the procedure and the process, and they're not afraid of it. They just don't want to do the wrong thing, and that's why they don't vote. They have to be invited to vote.
Attorney General, do you think that, in fact, if Republicans did a better job of outreach, of speaking to common interests with the Latino community, you could inspire more Latinos to vote?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the party gets that, and they're working very hard to address it. But it's a dual responsibility. I think citizens have a responsibility to care about these kinds of things, to come out and vote, get educated about what's required. But I also think it's a responsibility of the candidates. They should be inspiring. They're reaching out to the Hispanic community. I think there's a responsibility both with the electorate and with the candidates running for office.
Ms. Wilson, what do you attribute the 48% Hispanic turnout to in 2012? Why? Why is that the lowest when you look at all the major racial groups in the country?
Well, I agree with both our other panelists, and I think a lot of times people don't understand, or they have to ask themselves, what's in it for me? And they don't understand what's in it for them. And I do agree you have to do more community forums, because as I say, an informed community is a better community. And we put on community forums, you let them know what the issues are and the candidates. I think there'll be more of an interest. And the other problem you have is people still believe that their vote doesn't count, or they vote for, let's say, a certain proposition, then it gets overturned, and they're mad, and they're saying not let the people vote, when they realize, they don't realize sometimes that stuff's unconstitutional, or there was a problem with the propositions. But I think it's just keeping people more informed, and then once they're informed, they'll become more involved.
I have two examples. We have, of course, Jerry Brown was here, and when he ran, his opponent spent about $160 million, his Republican opponent, to get elected. Jerry Brown spent $35 million. But the way he got elected, and it was primarily the labor movement, right? It was people, it was the janitors and the housekeepers and the laborers and construction workers that went door to door in Los Angeles. Kamala Harris, we heard her wonderful speech, is a great woman. She was elected by, 3,000 votes or something like that. It was some kind of teeny-weeny amount. And when we were going door to door, people didn't want to vote. They were mad, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs. Some of their friends or neighbors or relatives were deported. And so we had to really pull them out and say, it's important for you to vote, it's important for you to vote. And we did get them out to vote. But it was pulling teeth to get people out to vote, So Proposition 30, in California, the reason that we are now in a surplus in our state of California is because we passed Proposition 30 to tax. By the way, this is good for the people in the other states, okay? We passed a law that millionaires have to pay 3% more in state taxes. If you have $1 million, you pay 3% more, $500,000, 2% more, 250,000, 1% more. So we were able to bring in over $6 billion into the state of California. Most of that went to education. How did we get that? Again, we had to go door to door, phone banking to get people to vote for that. And the people that we went to, interesting, to get that margin of victory, it was not the always voters. It was the voters that don't always vote, the immigrants that have just recently become citizens, and people that we registered and that didn't vote before. But it can happen, but it just takes an awful lot of work to make it happen. But sí se puede.
So on this 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, next year 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, I want to thank our panelists for helping us to put our place in history and help us all to understand our role in a continuing effort to make democracy alive in America. Dolores Huerta, Judge Alberto Gonzales, Jaleel Wilson, thank you very much. Alex.